Wait on somebody before I get started. You're going to go ahead?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, there you are. I was looking for you, Tom.
You ain't looking for nothing.
I was looking for you. So I probably should have said earlier, after the gentleman passed out, they took him out. When my wife was pregnant with our first child, Isaac, I was preaching, and she was about halfway back in the auditorium, and I kept watching her do this number back and forth, and she's got part of her medication, low blood pressure, and she sat there, she kept getting further and further, and she passed out while I was preaching one time. So that wasn't my first experience with somebody passing out. I actually didn't stop when she passed out, crazy enough. So. She was a preacher's wife. She's got to be prepared for anything, right? So.
Yeah, so now this afternoon, since you did stop for a total stranger and not her, you're in a
It's
dog.
rough, right? It's going to be rough tonight. We get the man.
He's old, he's more mature now.
She's going to hold that one forever. So, we'll be holding on. So this afternoon, this lesson is going to be a little more autobiographical. I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me about 6 years ago, 5.5, almost 6 years ago, and kind of tell you what God did through me in the midst of that, through my family and those type of things. I was a youth minister, like I said earlier. I did that for about 10, 11 years before I started preaching full time. We were a smaller church, a smaller youth group, and we didn't have a camp like y'all do here, where there's kind of the churches work together, everybody kind of comes together. We had, in Nashville, you got all these big churches, and they all have either have their own campsites or they do their own weeks. And so eventually I got to where I was able to attach to a church, and we went with the Hermitage Church, where my family and I attend right now. And it was our first year. It was June 2009. Jason Shepard was youth minister there, a good friend of mine, still is. And so we had a camp started great. We started on Sunday evening. We had a good Sunday night. It was hot. Tennessee in the summer is really, really hot, really sticky. And so we had a good first day. The day was coming to an end, and I was going to be speaking that night in the evening devotional time. And so we were sitting there, and as happens in Tennessee, it gets hot during the day, and then the storms brew, and they blow into town, and some of them can be really bad. And so as we spent the day kind of working through our stuff, we saw on the radar how the storms were building and kind of heading towards camp. And we were in this little valley. It's called Valley View Camp. It's this valley. It's a beautiful little area, hills on each side with big tall trees. And so we had dinner, and we had this pre-devotional activity. We had this game going on, lots of noise. The kids were having a good time, a lot of carrying on. And as this all was happening, the storms were brewing, like it was getting ominous outside. And I was sitting in a place kind of studying through my lesson. I was looking out, and the sky was looking really funky, and I was just sitting there. And so I had my cell phone out, and I was watching the radar, right? And the red kept getting redder, and so the storms kept getting more and more fierce. So I went and found the other youth minister, and I said, Jason, we've got to find some weather information before something drops on us we don't know. And so we rushed out, and there was our nurse's station was a trailer. A little camper trailer that was one of those pop-outs. Each end popped out, you had beds down there, and you kind of had the stuff in the middle. I guess it's called a pop-up. So Jason and I were in there, and the whole thing was not much wider than this section between the pews right here. You got a couch on one side, and so Jason was sitting here, I was standing in the aisle, and our nurse was sitting right here, our camp nurse was here, and I had a guy sitting behind me that was one of the cooks for camp. So we had a TV that had a satellite, and we were trying to find some information on it. We had 3 or 4 other people in there, and it started rocking, so those people got out. And so the last thing I remember was I was standing there, and Jason was here, and I was looking at the box, the box for the TV. And the next thing I know is I wake up, and I'm laying on the floor of the camper. I'm soaking wet, and I can't move. I'm pinned to the floor, and I don't have any idea where I'm at. I can't breathe. I've got pain all over my body. I just don't know what's going on. Right? And so I could hear commotion going on. I could hear the storm still raging. Right? I can still hear everything, but I keep passing out. I hold to, and I can't catch my breath. My respiratory labors very quick, and I pass out again. And so the first thing I remember is a guy climbed in there, and he started tugging on my left foot. And every time he pulled on my left foot, it was like fire running all over my body. And that woke me up. And the first words I said were, "Stop touching my foot." And And so he stopped and talked to me for a minute, and then a paramedic climbed in behind me, and he told me his name. He said, "I'm going to get you out of here." I still didn't know what was going on. I didn't have any idea. And so he said, "I'm going to roll you over." They slid a backboard in behind me. "I'm going to roll you over and pull you out." Well, what happened was a lightning struck a tree that was directly behind the camp. About an 80-foot sugar maple tree. Big enough around I couldn't put my arms around it. Lightning struck that tree and laid it right on top of us. It literally laid right across my back. I was pinned to the floor of the camper. I couldn't get out from underneath it. They had to take it apart and kind of scoop me out and put me on the backboard. When he rolled me on the backboard, I passed out immediately. I woke up outside the camper in the pouring rain on a gurney and called for my wife. She was, as you can imagine, she was absolutely in pieces because they thought I was dead. They didn't know what was going on. I was the one that couldn't get out. I was the only one that was in there and could not get myself out of the camper. I didn't know what was going on. And so they get me out, and by the time they got me in the ambulance, they put me on oxygen, and I finally got kind of back to myself enough to where I kind of knew my humor regained its position, like the gentleman out here that when they asked him how old he was, he said, "Well, I'm too old." That was his response. The first thing they did is they started cutting my clothes off of me. And as she started taking the scissors and cutting through my shirt, I was like, "Oh, this is my favorite shirt." and that's all I could really think about in the moment. But it was a traumatic accident for me. Jason, the other youth minister, amazingly did not get a scratch. He saw the whole thing happen, was sitting right there. He was one that got help. The guy that was sitting behind me that cooked, it broke his leg. It popped the bone out of the leg. It broke his leg so bad. The nurse was sitting right here. I really think I fell on her before I fell on the floor. It broke her neck. It did several things to her body. And she had the part of the brunt. It really got me good. It put a hole in my head. It cracked my sternum. It broke several ribs on this side. Punctured and collapsed this lung. It broke my back in the middle up here, 3 or 4 places. It broke this leg, both lower knee, and it crushed my left foot. That was kind of the extent of my injuries. I went from there to Vanderbilt. I spent 8 days in the trauma unit at Vanderbilt. I spent 4.5 weeks at Stallworth Rehab Hospital, and then about 3 months of rehab following that. I had to have surgery on my foot. They didn't know how bad my lungs were until they did surgery on my foot. When they did surgery on my foot, I couldn't come out from underneath anesthesia because my lungs couldn't support me breathing. So they kept me on a ventilator for almost a day following that. I got out of rehab, right? You go through all that. I got out of rehab. I go home for 2 weeks, and my heart starts racing. I can't catch my breath, and I have a pulmonary embolism. And so I go back to the hospital with a large blood clot in my left lung. I spend another 2 weeks in the hospital, large blood clot in my left lung. I go home. About 2 months later, I go back to the hospital because I have a blood infection, an infection in my blood, in a sore that had collected blood in my body, didn't resolve itself. And so I went back to the hospital with high fever and tremendous pain. And it was an interesting year for us. 2009 was an interesting year for us. Now, without my wife, there's no way I could have made it. I tell you, you see the stature of my life, you see me. My wife, for 3 months, pushed me around in a wheelchair, if you can imagine, right? Up and down walkways, in and out of elevators. When they broke my back, they put me in this, they call it TLSO. If you're a nurse, you probably know what that is. I call it a turtle shell. It goes from here to here, and it keeps you, when I was above 20 degrees, I had to have this shell on, kept my back where it needed to be so it could heal. While I was in that position, my left shoulder froze up because of the way it held me. I had to have surgery on my left shoulder in April. And I tell you all that to tell you, in the midst of all that, God did some amazing things. God did some amazing things in the midst of all that. My relationship with my wife, we spent a lot of time together. We didn't have kids at that time. Right? That was before we had kids. That was 2 years before we had kids. It was a good thing. God was watching out. It was a good thing we didn't have kids because it was a tremendous, the whole event was tremendous. It was one of those things that you couldn't imagine. You couldn't wrap your head around just all it was and all the stuff that was going on. I call it, in my mind, I call it an amazing time of self-discovery in my relationship with God. I've been a minister for 9 years, gone through a lot of stuff, but nothing like this. My wife, like I said, pushed her around in a wheelchair. She drove thousands of miles in her car. We bought a new car. We bought a new to us car in the springtime, and she probably put 30,000 miles on it that summer to work home, hospital, work home, rehab, and just all these different places. She slept in a cot beside my bed, and I kept waiting. You go through these things, and you keep waiting for God to speak some amazing truth into your life. It's like you go through it, and you keep waiting for one of those epiphanies where God's like, okay, this is what I need you to learn out of this. This is what I want you to learn. And maybe I'm hard-headed. Maybe if you get to know me more, you'll say amen. Maybe I'm hard-headed. And maybe God had to work over a greater period of time to do that in me. And I was disappointed at first because I really wanted some great spiritual awakening in the midst of this pain. I wanted there to be, you want there to be a reason in the midst of it. You want to go through the other side and come out and be like, okay, I understand what we went through. There's a Randy Harris. I don't know if you know who Randy Harris is. He's a professor at Abilene Christian. He calls himself a Church of Christ monk. He's not married, does a lot of stuff, just meditation, and he's a very spiritual person, really like Randy Harris. He said one summer he went to a monk retreat in Texas, and he spent a whole month, and the deal was you couldn't talk. You couldn't talk the whole time. There was no, and so he said, I went, and I kept hoping that something would happen. I kept hoping that God would reveal something great to me, and he said, and in his drive, if you ever heard him speak, he's got this drive where he's saying, I got nothing. And I got to tell you, I felt like that, right? I went through all of this, and I came out the other side, and I was like, I really got nothing. But what I really got was an amazing journey that God revealed some stuff to me. God really revealed some amazing things in the midst of all the goings on and all the happenings. I want to read you one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible, Psalm 27. And I want to make a few points out of Psalm 27 this morning or this afternoon as we kind of end our time together. Love Psalm 27. I first heard Psalm 27 in a powerful way right after 9/11. I was still working at Caterpillar in 2001, and I remember taking a lunch break the day after 9/11 happened. And I was driving out the gates of the shop, and I remember they were broadcasting the memorial service from the great cathedral in Washington, D.C., and this African-American man got up there and read this, and it just spoke amazing at the time. And I want you to hear and just listen to what they would say in here. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evil men advance against me to devour my flesh, when my enemies and my foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then will I be confident. One thing I ask of the Lord, this is what I seek. I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple. For in the day of trouble He will keep me safe in His dwelling. He will hide me in the shelter of His tabernacle and set me high on a rock, high upon a rock. Then my head will be exalted above the enemies who surround me. At His tabernacle I will sacrifice with shouts of joy. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Hear my voice when I call, O Lord. Be merciful to me and answer me. My heart says of you, seek His face, your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my helper. Do not reject me or forsake me, O God, my Savior. If my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Teach me your way, O Lord. Lead me in a straight path because of my oppressors. Do not turn me over to the desires of my foes, for false witnesses rise up against me, breathing out violence. I am still confident. It's a beautiful thing the way he ends, right? He talks about all this stuff, and he says, I'm still confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. The powerful passage. If you know the story of David, if you know the life of David, you know a man who's had the highest highs and the lowest lows. He's been the king of God's people. He's been the anointed one. He's the one that they look to be the mighty man. And in the same time, he has such failures. He has such humanity about him that it undermines his family. He has to run from his own children. He has to run from his own son. He spends time hiding and away. Just, it's an amazing thing to hear the different ways in which he processes that, and to be a poet like he was, and to be able to write it down and to process out loud those things. And so he begins with that beautiful thought, right? God is a stronghold of my life. I find my refuge in Him. Now, prior to this action, I had faith in God, right? Prior to this action, I was a minister. I was a child of a minister. I was plugged in. I was engaged. It was what my life was about. But I truly don't know. And I spent a lot of time in hospitals, not as a patient, but as somebody sitting at bedside with people who are suffering, people who are hurting, with people who are dying. And I've walked through that with a lot of people. And as I've done that, I don't know how people do that without God. I truly don't have any idea how you go through some of the stuff that happens in this life. And I'm not talking about stuff from this morning where, you get a hangnail, you get a flat tire, you get something, and you're like, oh, I can't believe this happened to me again. I'm talking about trees falling on you, cancer, life-altering diseases, things that happen and come into your life. I don't know. And I'm a little bit ashamed it took a tree falling on me to grasp this reality to an even greater extent. Sometimes we become trapped in life in such a way that we don't know how to navigate it. Right? We become trapped in life in such a way that if God isn't our stronghold, how do we get by? If God isn't our stronghold, how do we move forward? If God isn't the one taking care of us, how do we become what we need to be? How do we live? How do we survive? The thing about faith, we talked about Caleb this morning, we talked about Abraham in the Bible class hour. The thing about faith is understanding that God's the one that you can really count on. I love my wife. And she's taking great care of me. But I have greater faith in God than I have in my wife. That's a relationship with God, right? God first, and then it flows out from there. I love my wife. She would do anything for me. But I know that God ultimately is the only one that I can count on in life. God ultimately is the only one that can meet all my needs. God is the only one that could send Jesus to meet the only need that we could not do for ourselves through salvation, which was reconciliation back to Him. And David's story, and as amazing as that story is, the highest highs and lowest lows, and in the end you hear the cry, "The Lord is my light, my salvation. Be afraid. He is my refuge. He is the one that I go to. He is the one that I look for. He is the one that I care about." If David can say that in the midst of his story, what tree is going to fall on you? What thing is going to happen in your life that's going to be greater than that? That will prevent you from saying that God is my refuge. And then in the end of the chapter, the one I focused on there at the end, says, "I am confident of this, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." Following the accident, I was fully incapacitated. There was nothing I could do for myself. Now, think about that. There was nothing I could do for myself. I could not get out of bed on my own. I could not go to the bathroom on my own. I could not take a shower or a bath on my own. I could not do anything on my own. I couldn't even hardly feed myself on my own. God did some amazing things to people in my life during that time. I already talked to my wife. I tell my wife the whole time. I could spend my whole time talking to her. She did. I woke up and there was the nurse with the trauma unit. The section we were in was a horseshoe. At least I think it was. But I woke up the first morning after, and the next bed next to me, you wake up and you feel like somebody's looking at you. You've done that. You're just thinking, you feel like somebody's, and I know y'all with kids know that feeling, right? I'm just waiting to wake up one day and eyes be looking at me in the face. It hadn't happened yet, but I think it will soon. So I'm laying there and I wake up and I feel like somebody's looking at me. So I turn my head to the side and the nurse, her name was Barbara, is in the bed next to me. She's probably 10 yards away from me or so, and she's got her neck brace on. So the only thing she can do is cut her eyes, and so she's looking at me with her eyes. And we lock eyes, and she says, "How are you?" It's one of those things like you come to the church door, and it's almost this cordial greeting. You're like, "Hey, how you doing? Everything okay with you?" And my response was, when she asked me, I'm laying in the trauma, "I am okay." Right? That's my response. My response is, "I'm okay." And I said, "Well, I guess I could be better." Right? And it's just one of those situations where we get so programmed with the responses that that's kind of what come out. But I couldn't do anything for myself. I was literally helpless. Now, you want to know something that is humbling in your life? You have to rely on everybody for everything. You teach a lot about God and relying on God. But I saw the goodness of God through so many people. My wife was supported by so many people. We had some people come out and build a ramp in front of our home so I could get in and out of the house. There were people who came, they would work all day, they would come to the hospital room, they'd bring me sweet tea from McDonald's, and we would sit, we'd watch TV, and they'd just talk to me, and we'd hang out, spend so much time in the hospital. Took me places, built stuff for me. God's family is where I saw the goodness of God. When life is happening, when things are happening, faith in God, relationship with God, relationship with God and His people, that's where we engage this understanding of I'll still see goodness in daily living, and I'll see that through God and people. I'll see that through our connection to God and to each other. In verse 14, he says, "Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart. Wait for the Lord." You know, God, it's been this summer, it'll be 6 years since that happened. My mother-in-law, so you asked, my mother-in-law came in fall of 2009 when my wife had to go back to school to care for me so my wife could go back and do her job every day. So one of the reasons why my mother-in-law lives with us is because she gave up her life there to come here and to care for me when my wife went back to work. I need 24-hour care at that time. I couldn't be without somebody around. And this 6 years, God's still working that out in me. God's still working out this whole relying on Him, faith in Him. I remember one day I got out of bed, and I was just hurting. It was one of those days where the pain in my back was immense. I had pain everywhere. I sat on this bed and I broke down, and it was just like, I just want to stop. I just want to stop hurting. I said, "When's it going to stop hurting?" That's what I want to know. And I was saying it was just one of those days, and I just wanted the pain to stop. But she was there. My wife was there. She cried with me. But she was the presence of God. She was like, God will work through this. We'll get through this. We'll get through this. And God was faithful. Church, God was faithful, right? I'm not 100%. I'll never be 100%. My left leg doesn't work the way it ought to. It never will. I've had to have another surgery since to take the hardware they put in my left foot because it caused other problems. It's one of those never-ending things, right? You keep getting more things. I'll never be 100% whole again. When the weather changes, you want to know what's about to happen, ask me because my back is killing me. Whether it goes really high or whether it goes really low, it's just one of those things. But I can walk. Right? I can get out of bed, drive a car, I can make a living, I can do all those things. I may not be 100%, my aches and pains are manageable. I could dwell on what I can't do. I can tell you all things I can do that I really want to do, but I just can't do. I could dwell on that. Or I could be thankful, and I could be patient like Nick Vujic, which I talked about in the sermon this morning. I could be thankful for what I have and what God is using what I have in this world for Him. So, 2 takeaways that I want you to hear that I learned that God is still working out in me. And this may sound weird, but this comes from understanding where it comes from. 2 important takeaways. Number 1, I have nothing to lose. Hear what I have to say, church. I have nothing to lose. Everything I have in this life is a blessing from God. They are His, they are not mine. My wife, my kids, my family, my church home, my church family, all of that belongs to God. I'm a steward of that. I'm a steward of the money He gives me. I'm a steward of everything. Everything belongs to Him. And the call in my life and your life is to act like the stuff you have is God's. That's relationship. That's showing the world what it looks like to be in relationship with God. And everything He gives me, I offer back to Him in some form of surrender. so that he knows and I know, and I keep telling myself, this isn't mine. What God has given me is his, or his blessings, and I'm just trying to use them in the right way, asking him how to show me how to be a good steward of stuff. And once you get that point, it's kind of freeing because you realize you can't lose something you never really owned. You know, we get hung up on stuff in this world. We all get hung up on stuff. Whether it's a house, it's a car, it's clothes, it's a job, sometimes it's family. We get hung up on stuff in this world. And and the problem comes when it is mine. That's when the problem comes, right? When it's mine. Because then I have to fight to protect it, to keep it, to make it mine, to keep it mine. But hopefully I've got a new perspective. Hopefully it helps me be like David, to proclaim boldly with my heart, I have the Lord and I'll wait for him. I'll do what he's calling. Who am I going to fear? Who am I going to be scared of? Life is constantly in flux. Life is constantly changing. God is always there. God is always the rock. And the second thing is, which is for a minister, I think Rusty knows what I'm talking about, it's hard for me to really process, especially on weekends where I'm trying out. I don't have anything to prove. Now that's not to say that I don't love you and I wouldn't want to be your minister and I want to do the best I can. But at the end of the day, our society operates under the understanding that I have to prove myself. I have to prove to you why you should hire me. I have to prove, kids are growing up and they're having to prove to somebody why they should get to date, prove to me why you should date my son. Or those who have daughters, you would be much more vigilant than I would be, right? Prove to me why I should let you date my daughter, right?
They're not going to date.
That's right. Not for a long time, right? Or prove to me why you should be my leader. We're really bad about that, the church, and making our elders walk some amazing path to be our elders and prove some ungodly thing that they should have to prove. Prove to me why I should allow you to attend my church, allow you to attend my school, allow you to attend my club. Prove to me. And here's a news flash, in case you don't know it. God loves you. Period. There's no qualifiers. There's nothing else I have to say. God loves you. God loved you so much that while you did love him, and some of you still struggling to love him, that he sent his son to die for you while you're still in that sinless state, or still in that sinful state. God loved you enough to send his son to bridge the gap. And you have nothing to prove to anybody's life but to love God. And if you're living under the burden today that you have to prove your self-worth to somebody, you can tell your preacher told you. You can stop it. You can stop that today. God loves you. That's all you need to worry about. Our self-worth was established in the person and being of Jesus Christ and his death on the cross. God says you're worth it regardless of what your spouse says, regardless of what your children say, regardless of what your boss says, your family says, regardless of what anybody says. God loves you and there's nothing you can do to undo that. You may walk away from it, but there's nothing you can do to undo that. So stop trying to please everybody, because at the end of the day, guess what? You won't be able to do it and you'll just be frustrated. You will just be frustrated. Our God is good. Our God is amazing. He wants you to rest in him. He wants you to have peace. He wants you to find safety and security in him. And I pray that a tree doesn't have to fall on your foot. If that's what happens, I hope you learn that next. Will you pray with me? God, I thank you for the time my family and I have been able to spend with this room of yours here at Eastside. And Father, I pray that you bring them the right man, whoever that is, to serve them, to minister to them, to love them. And Father, I pray that we as a family of yours, that we embrace the idea, that we embrace the understanding that you love us, that you care about us, that you sent Jesus because you love us. And that's the most important thing that we should have focused in our minds, to be focused on in our lives. Father, thank you for this time. I thank you for this day. Father, I pray for the one who passed out here this morning. Pray your blessings on him, for Tom and his family as they work through the loss of the father. We pray your peace peace on them. I pray that this family gathers around as I know they will. We love that family. Walk with us this day. We love you. We thank you. In Jesus' name. All right, so I understand. Does anybody else want to get up before I get up before I jump into the question and answer? All right, so let me tell you a little bit about me, and that may answer a lot of your questions. I'm 39 years old. I grew up the son of a preacher. I've got two older brothers. They're not ministers. They are, one works for Mohawk Manufacturing, the other one is a physical therapist in Cookville, Tennessee. I've got two, my wife is Osa and her mom Nayada are from Albania. A little geography lesson, if you'll find Italy on the map, and you'll find Greece on the map, you'll find Albania between the two. So Albania sits right on top of Greece, and then there's a body of water that the movie is over here. I didn't go to Albania to get her. She came to me. I worked all that out. We met at Central Pike where I ministered. Where I wasn't working as a minister there then, but we met. She moved to Nashville. She moved to America to do an exchange program. Her senior in high school decided to stay and do her college work. She moved to Nashville to attend Lipscomb University. We were attending the same church at the same time, and God opened the right doors, put us in the same proximity, and the rest is history. This May, we will have been married 15 years. So God's blessed me immensely with my wife. She is an indispensable part of my ministry. If nothing else, she sits there and she smiles at me. She does much more. My faith story is I hate to say it's probably more typical for preachers' kids than it needs to be. I grew up in small churches. My dad was a missionary. I was born in Tasmania, Australia. My mom and dad were missionaries down there in Hobart. I was born there in 76. They moved there in 75. We all came home in 83. Then we moved back to Tennessee, kind of moved around Tennessee. We always were in small churches. When I say small church, I say 30 or less. Small church. Okay. Didn't have a youth group. My youth group was my two older brothers. I didn't like them very well. So it wasn't much of a youth group experience if you've been youth group with a bunch of kids. Thank you. You should be in a church with a youth group with a bunch of kids and with a youth minister, because that's a blessing. But when that time of life came about that you would see kids giving their life to God, nobody else was doing it. And that's not why you do it, but there just wasn't that impetus for me to do it. Like I said in my class initially, for a lot of us, a movement from being outside Christ to being inside Christ was nothing more than a decision when to be baptized versus some kind of transformational event. And we miss that in church. If interested to hear what I'm saying, it doesn't invalidate what you've been through, but we miss something. We don't struggle with having to give stuff up to be God's followers. So my life I knew what I needed to do. About the time I turned 18, I graduated high school, and I was at the point where I was either going to commit to God or I was going to walk away. I was at that point in my life. And we had a gospel meeting. I know we don't do that anymore. We had a gospel meeting one summer night. It was hot. And the preacher kind of cornered me before church started. He knew what I was struggling with. He said, we know what we need to be doing. And we kind of talked about it. He prayed over me that night. I gave my life to God. I was baptized and never looked back. I grew up, like I said, the son of a preacher. And I decided early on that preaching ministry wasn't what I wanted to do. And it wasn't what I wanted to do because I didn't want to move a lot. I went to about 5 different schools from Australia until I graduated high school. That meant every 4 or 5 years I was shedding all my friends and I was moving into a new community, meeting new people, doing new things. And I love my childhood. I love my family. We were very close-knit because of that. But I just didn't, that was a decision that my wife and I talked about that I didn't want to do. But again, God puts you where He wants you. God put us at Central Pike where I met my wife. The opportunity came up to work in the youth program. I volunteered to work in the youth program. A few years later, they put me on staff at a small pay. Then they put me in. I moved up, so I was full-time. Done a lot of things at that church. I've only served one church my entire ministry career. That's Central Pike Church of Christ. Youth ministry, involvement ministry, associate ministry. I did everything from take out the trash to make sure the floor was clean. I did whatever needed to be done. It all fell to me, and that was fine. I was okay to do that. And then about 3 years ago, I worked with 2 different preachers, and the last guy left, and it was tense, and they decided it was my turn. stepped in the role. They weren't sure I could do it. To be honest with you, I wasn't sure I could do it, but God could do anything. And I've moved in. I think that God's blessed me, and that we kind of move forward. I love the people of Central Pike. I want you to hear that part of the story. I grew up in ministry with that group of people. Love them. But they were a very traditional church and wanted to be a traditional church. Nothing wrong with that. That's what they wanted. I felt like God was calling me to something else. I want to be a church that was, I want to be part of a church that was interested in the community they were living in. I want to be part of a church that was interested in being a family of God and being rooted and grounded, and for the community to know we were there and to come see us, because they knew if they came to see us, we would love them and take care of. I wanted to be that group of people, and I love that Central Pike that they didn't want that. And so last year, about October, my wife and I really wrestled with it, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I was frustrated, I was angry, and I had a lot of just, it kept creating issues for me medically and things like that. And so eventually, at the December the 7th, I believe, was the first Sunday in December last year, I got to announce my resignation. I preached till the end of the year, and I was done with Central Pike at the end of the year. I attend Hermitage Church of Christ, which is in our little area there. I know the preacher there very well. That's where we're at. For the past 2 months, I've enjoyed spending a lot of time with my kids. I'm not sure what Isaac would do when I go back to work, because Isaac and I spend a lot of time together now. If it's just going to the dump or hanging out, we just spend a lot of time. And when I go back to work, that won't happen. So that's what I've been doing for 2 months. And I'll be honest with all of you here, because you're interviewing me as your minister. I'm not sure that if you'd asked me in December, I wasn't sure I still wanted to be a minister. I was getting close to burnout. I was very angry. I was very frustrated. And I won't put anybody on the spot, but I'm here this weekend because of James Prescott. You all know Tim and Amy. James has been a
That's my dad right there.
God put James in the right place at the right time, and he was a blessing. And he's ever since in December, he told me, I think in December, maybe January, he said that he saw I was looking for a minister. And I trust James. I trust James. And he said, you need to give him a look. You need to go talk to him. And so that's my story. I'm still working through some of that. I got burned pretty good. And I got really frustrated. And still love God. One of the things I figured out, what I want to do, and Tom said this in the interview yesterday morning with the search committee. I said I wanted to go to church and have a normal Christian experience. I wanted to go be a normal Christian. Tom says, what does that mean? And I said, I don't know what that means. Because I started going to church and I thought, this is going to be good. I want to go. I haven't sat with my wife in worship for 10 years. Every Sunday I've had something to do. I've never been able to sit beside my wife in worship. We've sat beside each other more in worship for the past 2 months than we have in 14 years, which has been great. I wanted to go sit with my wife, sit with my kids. I wanted to go just be. But what I found out in the midst of that is that's not what God has for me. God's got something else for me. God's got something else that He's created me for. And so I'm trying to figure out how to do that and do that the best way. You'll know whatever works out, you'll know if God speaks to me and it moves my heart and I cry. I'm not ashamed of that. God does that.
Amen.
I could stifle that, but I think I'm stifling the Spirit. So, I'm sorry. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Now I'll take your questions, if you have any. If not, we can go home. Our sign, I understand there's a shower. So, no shower? We can go home. Do what?
That's the parents of the little girl who's in the hospital.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
What would you say was the source of your discouragement and your burnout?
To be honest, leadership. And here's my biggest struggle with leadership as I've dealt with it. We pick men who are good at business to be shepherds. And just because you can run a Fortune 500 company doesn't mean you can have a church. Shepherding's a different shepherding's a different thing. Shepherding is not about managing the building, not about managing the budget. It's about loving people. I've yet to work with a group of elders who love people. They're good deacons. I work with two men. The two elders that I worked with towards the end at Central Pike were some of the best deacons I've ever worked with in my life. They loved taking care of the building. One of them loved taking care of the budget. The other one loved taking care of the building. They would have been great at that. But they just didn't have God didn't make them do elders. Unfortunately, there was a struggle and breakdown of what it was supposed to be be an elder. For some people think elder is business. Elder is shepherd. That's my perspective. So that's what I'm Yes.
So, let's say you're studying the Bible with someone who's not a Christian. What does that look like? How do you like to?
I like to spend time with Jesus. If I'm going to talk to somebody about God, I'm going to spend time with them, probably in Matthew, probably Sermon on the Mount, to talk about what Jesus said true discipleship is all about. We're going to read and we're going to discuss. In the past, I've used study tracks, study methods, those type of things. I'm not looking to get a yes out of you so much as I'm looking for you to have a relationship with God. So we're going to talk about relationship with God. I'm going to tell you a lot about my experience. I want to hear about your experience. I want to help you see where God has been active in your life, even when you didn't realize it, see where God's working in your life through people and all that. But we're going to spend a lot of time with Jesus talking about his will, talking about what he expects, talking about the frustration he has with his followers, how we're going to get it wrong. Spending time in the Bible. Not jumping here or there, but we'll spend time kind of walking through it.
What do you call a traditional church? You said that's what was.
Well, when I say traditional, I say, and y'all don't have this here. We had a big wooden pulpit up front. We had a communion table up front. And there was a point where we moved the communion table back and started serving in the back. And after I started preaching, I moved the pulpit off. We put in a projection system like we have here. And there were things like, when they came to the building, they wanted it to look like a church, but they wanted it to look like the way they'd always seen it. They wanted what they'd always had. They wanted, and I told you this morning, I don't wear a suit and tie. They wanted somebody who's going to wear a suit, who's going to stand behind the podium. They wanted the communion table up front. They didn't want this up here. They wanted to sing from songbooks. They wanted everything the way they'd grown up with it without any innovations to meet a culture that's changing. Yes?
Do you ever use the PowerPoint for your
I
lesson?
I do. I kind of go back and forth on that. If I'm in the midst of a series, I will use it. I didn't use it this weekend because I didn't want to be a distraction, but I do use it. I use it extensively.
The other thing I wondered is how you felt about teaching classes, like Bible study class in the morning or Wednesday night or seniors class.
I'll teach whatever. Here's the only thing, somebody asked me this weekend too. When I preach on Sunday mornings, I like just to preach. I like to give my entire Sunday morning focus to the sermon. So I don't want to teach a class on Sunday morning, but I will preach on Sunday mornings. I'll lead a small group on Sunday nights or teach on Sunday nights. I'll teach on Wednesday nights. I'll teach on my Sunday morning sermons will be New Testament, the Gospels. My Wednesday night classes will be Old Testament. Last year I taught through the book of Genesis on Wednesday night. Did Matthew on Sunday morning. That's a good balance. So any class you'd like for me to teach, I'm game for that. But that Sunday morning is the only one where I like to have that kind of that down a bit, so I can focus on my sermon. Yes.
Family question.
Okay.
It's going to get bigger.
If you ask me, no. She wanted maybe, right? So there you go.
Yes.
So, hey,
Yes.
so no, maybe. So there you go.
Why not?
Yeah. Do what? Why not? Because I love my two boys. Hey, well, here's why not. Now, that's a good question. I'll tell you why not. I grew up in a family of three, right? And my middle brother, I love him. He's just all there's something about that. I always told her, I said, either one, two, or four. The three's an odd dynamic. The three's an odd dynamic. So I don't want to. Hey, easy, easy. That's her. That's what she's all about. She wants a little girl. If she gets another boy, she'll find out.
Well, I sort of gather that the congregation you was with, you said you wanted to do something with more outreach, more go to the people, entice people to come. Evidently, the eldership you had was unwilling to do that. Can you give us, for example, what you wanted to do?
Well,
The elders didn't want
sure. Well, the beginning of 2012, I came to the congregation. I said, look, if we close the doors tomorrow, would the community know we weren't here? Other than that the building was dark and the street sign wasn't on anymore, would the community know that we're not here? And we came to painful realization that they probably wouldn't know we weren't here anymore because we were a very inward-focused church. We weren't. The community came every now and again. So my goal for 2012 was for us to become a church about the community. I set goals of having egg hunts and super subdivisions in our general area. We did a mobile VBS that year. It didn't work great, but it was one of those things that I wanted to get out into communities to do it. We had a little skit that we put together on a trailer. We drove it around and we did songs and we did crafts and we played. It was, we went to specific subdivisions. We didn't ask them to come to us. The model of asking the world to come to us doesn't work anymore. Build it and they will come. I'm a big Kevin Costner fan, but that doesn't work in churches, right? You build it, we build big buildings, and sometimes they're empty because we have to go to where they're at. The greatest evangelism tool we have is meeting people where they're at and helping them see God working in their life where they're at. And we can't do that if all we do is ask them to come in here. We have to, and so what I wanted was to get us out into the community, and there's too many people who thought, well, we need to go door knocking, we bring them here. And it just wasn't working. And it wasn't working enough that I saw that we couldn't keep doing that and not getting anything. So that was some of the things that I endeavored to do.
But you did door knock, right?
I have done door knocking before, yeah.
Did the congregation do door knocking or just?
About 10 years ago we did, yeah. And we did it until we did it until a lady wrote us up on her blog and put us out on the next. What we did is we went knocking doors. When we home, we put a piece of paper in the door. And she wrote a scathing blog about somebody who left chocolates on her door, somebody who left, and she named us all by name. And I use that as an example of how our culture is changing. And even if somebody's home and you go knock on the door, they're not going to come answer it. If somebody's not there, you leave a piece of paper, you know what you tell somebody who's driving around? There's nobody in the house. Because her point was, you've just told somebody that I'm not here and they come break into my house. So we haven't figured yet.
What concerns do you have about joining a new congregation? What concerns do you have about each side?
It's a long way from home, number one. It's not a long way, right? But
Your wife's home or your home?
it's a long way from her home. It's less. But if we're in a place we've been 14 years. Our whole social network's there. If we picked up and moved here, we would pick up and we would shed family, we would shed friends, a career my wife has worked to build where she's at, and that's a big component. That's a big concern. How then do I take a family of 5 that is deeply rooted with a community of believers and a bigger community and put them in a new place? Because I've done that several times, and how that would work for the family. I'm hesitant, and Tom asked me after I remember the other day. Yesterday he asked me, I'm gun shy about elders, to be honest with you. I spent some time with your elders, I believe they're great men. I'm a little gun shy. So just to be perfectly honest, that's one of my concerns. I'm concerned that I come in here and 6 months down the road, who you say you want to be isn't who you want to be. I'm not sure if that process is right, if that comes out right, but that's I don't think that's going to happen, right? But if you ask me, that would be a concern. I'd be concerned of showing up and not being as great or as what we're talking about. I've joined enough, like I said, I've moved a lot. Building relationships is pretty easy for me, but I kind of do that. I have a role, I have a position, so that's not a big deal to me. It's a little bit different from my wife and my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, even though she speaks English pretty well, but she still, has some issues with that, and so there's still, it's a whole new arena for her. And then the kids, they're still, Noah doesn't know anybody. Noah goes wherever somebody carries him. But Isaac's got a lot of friends. We were driving up here, and he asked me to go into his friend's house every 10 minutes. Who's in Nashville, so he's got a little bit of survivability. But my greatest concern probably lies around what health how to affect my family. Yeah.
What's your favorite gospel hymn and why?
Hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. I love that song. And why is the second verse where it says, Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come. My accident is my Ebenezer. It's one of those things where I raise it up and I say, you know, if it wasn't for God, I wouldn't even be here. I wouldn't be where I am. And so I love that song. Another one, tag on that is We Will Glorify. I love that song. I would have made that our marching hymn at Central Pike if I could have done it, just so that we understand we go out there. Our job is to glorify God, nothing else. Anybody else? Yes.
When your children get school age, are you homeschooler or are you going to public school?
We went to public or private school. My wife works as a social worker in the school system, so that's what we were, depending on where we're at. If we were in Nashville, we'd like to send them to Lipscomb school. But, you know, that's one of those things we'd like to do private, but public school, she works outside the home. She likes working outside the home. She's worked very hard for her degree and her licensure, and I don't want to ask her to take that away, because unless she wants to. If she wants to do that, that's fine. That's our goal.
If she homeschool, she can still get school counseling.
That's right.
Yeah, we got
Just on a smaller, both of y'all just, go ahead.
Your work in Tasmania, of course, you were growing up there. Do you remember anything about that, about Hobart?
I remember a little bit. I remember going door knocking with my dad. I do remember that as a young child. And here's one of the strangest things. And here's one thing that sticks in your mind about that's the negative. We went door knocking one time, and my dad and I, this house had a stone wall around it, or a brick wall around it. And there was a lady from here to the lady in the green right there. I could talk like this, and she ignored me. She ignored us. We stood there for 5 minutes, and my dad tried to talk to her, tried to engage her, just to ask her how her day was, and she absolutely ignored us. I do remember, we had, in Hobart, it was interesting, we kind of started without a building, just kind of this little group meeting together. And one of my fondest memories of Hobart was whenever we baptized somebody, we took them to the ocean to do it. And it was always a wonderful experience on the ocean, and just kind of that experience.
At that time, there was a congregation in Hobart that was already established. Did you have any fellowship with them?
I'm not sure which one, we were at the Eastern Shore Church, which was, I know Hobart was split into two parts, and there was a big bridge. We were at Eastern Shore on that side, so I'm not sure. I think I remember those